Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We are coming to you from Holyoke, Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining me is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the Historical Tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Gloom. And he offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Massachusetts. Now, you actually lead these tours and give these presentations yourself, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I love to do neighborhood ones, especially when they have big parks like this one does.
Awesome. So today you're going to be telling us about the Springdale Park in Holyoke. So Springdale in Holyoke is geographically the smallest neighborhood in the city. Tell us some of its features.
Well, in this one, the park absolutely dominates the neighborhood, which is very unusual. It's a beautiful park. It's along the Connecticut River, and it's been changed, and the neighborhood has changed around it. Remember that when this park started, there was no one here. This was just an outlying, very rural area, like maybe 3 houses. And now it has hundreds of houses. It's amazing. And it changed because the trolley was coming through. But slightly before the trolley was coming through, there was a park started in 1905 by John Prue. And he wanted to have a park where horse races could run. And I think it was mostly trotters. And he would charge people a fee to come in and watch it and gamble. And some people would gawk from the outside, so he built a very tall fence so they couldn't look over it. So he had a trotting park going. And Holyoke wanted to start up the equivalent of a trolley park, very similar to Mountain Park, very similar to Jones Point Park would have become. And so they said to him, "We want to buy this for this amount of money." He said no. And they tried for 3 years to get it out of him. Right? They tried 1911, 1912, 1913. Finally, they just took it. And they took it for the amount of money that was lower than anything they'd ever offered him. So he lost out a little bit. He had a beautiful house in this neighborhood. He was trying to entice people to come in and build gorgeous houses in this neighborhood. That never happened. But what did happen was that he had a construction firm, and they built simpler houses in this neighborhood, and they're up the side streets. And others came in and they built tenement houses along the front of that road. And so it developed into a nice residential section with a beautiful park alongside of it. Now, the park itself we're going to describe in the next, but some more features are the cliff in the background, and that was supposed to be developed by the Olmsted brothers, just like the park had been developed. And also, it had an industrial park where Acme Chain came in. At the very edge of it, it starts right where the third level canal ends. Nowadays, it starts where 391 is an over section. And in there, you had a few mills, like the Voxton mill, which made postcards. And where does it end, though? Well, towards the south, you're going to go from Springdale to Ingleside. And the end is, as soon as you go around the bend, and you're heading towards the first car dealer, the Marcotte Ford, that's the end of Springdale. It's very small, in both directions, maybe 3/4 of miles in both directions, making it geographically, out of the 50 neighborhoods, the smallest of all.
So describe to us the Springdale Park and
All right,
itself.
the park I've developed in other podcasts, but simply put, it's an Olmsted designed park. And in 1913, 1915, they designed it. And then it was implemented by Holyoke Public Works. And it was ready. And one feature not in the design was, sure, a lot of vegetation was planted on purpose in certain places, but a rose patch was added. And every year, the city of Holyoke would put in more roses, or private individuals would put in more roses, or George Sinclair, the florist of Holyoke, would put in more roses, and it developed an enormous rose section. And that rose section kept going. It died off at one point, but then it got revived in the 1960s, 70s, and then it died off again. And about the year, late 1990s, it was revived again, but then it died off. Roses you got to keep working on. And so now there's no roses there, but that must have been an incredible feature to see. There was, by my count, at the height, about 800 rose bushes in that Springdale Park. Now, the rest of the park I've described in other places, so the change from being a levee system to a dike system happened in 1940. There were sections made by Olmsted Brothers, including a cricket field, a place for calisthenics, because it was in a German neighborhood, and they love outdoor calisthenics. And so this park was a very, very unique park, very well made, nice curving paths, a typical Olmsted Brothers design.
So quickly before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill in our listeners, if you want to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there he has both videos of the various stops along each tour and also past and present photos of the historical sites throughout as well. And if you are interested in setting up a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214B@yahoo.com. And they are perfect for fun and educational outdoor activities for the whole family or for group parties, especially those special occasions and get-togethers. And they're also good just for getting outdoors for the day. So getting back to our interview, so describe life in this neighborhood.
Okay, now this became heavily residential, and what you need are grocery stores, drugstores, school. One thing it never got was a church, but it got the Springdale School, and that was in two different places in a little park. The second one is still there as a special education school, and the original Springdale School was towards the back of that same section. There's still out in front a couple of grocery stores, a couple of restaurants. Those have changed through the years, and so you had places to go shop. And otherwise, they put in sidewalks on both sides of the street. The sidewalk on the Springdale Park side curves into the park for a reason, because they wanted people to pass through the gorgeous park. Now, most people tell me that who lived there that when they were young, they would go, and this was their big playground. So most of the houses in this neighborhood don't have big playgrounds or big backyards at all, and they would use the park as a place to go in and play. They would go and use the wading pool, which was at first a small one, then it became a larger one, probably the biggest wading pool in Holyoke. And part of the design of this park was that it had a little folk section where mothers can bring their 1, 2, and 3-year-old children into a special section set aside for them, where they can take care of their little kids. Now, the life was simple, but remember you had a trolley passing through, and so you can go both directions towards West Springfield, or go north into downtown Holyoke. So you had everything you needed. There were churches in the lower section of Holyoke, or the upper section of Holyoke, that served all the communities. For instance, Precious Blood Church was in South Holyoke, the next neighborhood, and the German Lutheran Church, which served the Germans in this neighborhood, was in the next neighborhood also. So they had everything basically that they needed.
So what do you foresee is Springdale's future?
Oh, I think its future would be that it'll keep a lot of its features now. I hope it doesn't ever lose its park, because that defines the neighborhood and it makes it very nice to live in and cozy feel to it. It's hard to develop towards the west because it's already developed lots of houses. So I hope that stays there. One thing that could happen are that you have the industrial park redeveloped again. It went upwards and then downwards and then upwards. And so it's changed with the time. And I hope it has positive changes for itself, that it gets more business to move into the industrial park. Subaki, which is the Acme chain, is still there, but hopefully they'll get others. And so it'll change in a positive sense. And thank you.
So thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours. And we want to thank our listeners again for tuning in. And you can also tune into a large selection of our other podcasts and much more at his website. Again, that's holyokecanaltour.org. And you can also email him directly for private tours or to inquire about anything else. Again, at bobcat4214B@yahoo.com. And be sure to keep an eye out for his upcoming 2024 season tours and more as they become available. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We are coming to you from Holyoke, Massachusetts. I'm your host, Carrie, and I am here with our very own historian, Robert. He is the founder and also provides the historical tours of Greater Holyoke. Now, today we're going to be discussing the Springdale Park. So, what is the history of Springdale Park?
Alright, it has a long history because it was started in 1895 as a private park called Riverside Park. It was started by a man named John Prue, and what he did was he turned it, sure, it looked like a park. It had carnivals and fairs, but it was mostly for horse racing, and mostly it was the style of horse racing called trotters. And I guess he loved horses himself, and he had a lot of horses of his own, but he would run a business for horse racing there. So the history from 1895 was that. Now, that ended in 1905, and the reason was, since 1900, and especially since 1902, the city of Holyoke wanted to take over this park. They wanted to make it into a city-owned trolley park, and not with the highest definition. Highest definition is a private park owned by a trolley company, but the city of Holyoke wanted to make it like a neighborhood park along a trolley line, almost like a trolley park. And John Prue refused from 1902 to 1905 to do that. In fact, the prices that he refused at were all higher than he was paid in 1905 when the city took it over by force, by eminent domain. And that's very strange nowadays. Such a thing would probably not happen because there was no great need for this park for the city. But they did it, and they immediately turned it over into an Olmsted design park, and they designed the park into what Olmsted had said that it should be looked like from 1906, 1907, 1908. It's ready probably by the end of 1908. And what did it have? It had 2 baseball fields, a cricket field. It also had towards its northern end 3 dedicated areas. One was a very special region that was for calisthenics for adults. And in the middle section had a wading pool for children. And then in the very northwest corner, a very small area for little people. It's called a little folks area. Folks in German means people, little people area. And mothers love to bring their tiny little children there. They had a private area. And so the start of Springdale Park it changed drastically through the years, and it changed into a very quaint, pretty little park, and that's what we're going to talk about, how its features have changed through the years, and we're going to talk about John Prue himself.
So, discuss the dike system of this park.
Okay, now the dike system is different from the levee system that was there before. A levee system is one that does not have a pump to remove water that goes over the top of the levee. And most big floods go over the top, and then the water's trapped. So a levee traps water in a place that you don't want it to be trapped. But a dike is a system which has pumps on the side away from the river. And thus, when water goes into an area, you can pump out that water and get it back into the river system. So the dike system of this park it's the 5th one of a series, of course, 5 that are along the Connecticut River and along the industrial part of the city where the water is lowest. It's one that is also with a pump station, and the pump station is very obvious because it's a building that looks ornate on the facade, but it's very close to where the dike or the grassy elevated area is. And the pumps in there can be activated and get rid of all the water that comes over. Now, in 1936 and 1938, they had enormous floods in Springdale Park from a hurricane and then from an enormous Connecticut River flood. And people were disappointed because their houses and their apartments and their stores were flooded. And so the Corps of Engineers at the federal level of the United States had this built. They designed it, and then the O'Connell Company of Holyoke put it in, and it has not been used. It was built in 1940. It's now 83 years later. It's never been used, but the pumps are still worthy, and they'll still work because they're tested out once in a while. So I believe the stake system is wonderful. And again, there's 5 of them along the Connecticut River through Holyoke. One right at Pulaski Park, another by where the second level canal starts, another right, that's the largest right in the middle of the flats area where a lot of the expensive mills are. The 4th one is the smallest, right by the Wilmington Bridge, and this one, a medium-sized pump, right by Springdale Park.
Okay, so now, by the way, to our listeners, before we continue with the rest of our interview, if you'd like to check out more of the services that he offers, and including his public and private group tours that he does, you can go to his website at holyokecanaltour.org, or also email him directly at bobche4214 capital B at yahoo.com. Again, that's Bobcat 4214 capital B at yahoo.com. So he offers both public and private tours, like I said, and then he also has videos of his tours and the stops that he does, as well as past and present photos of the stops that he does, and also the schedule for the 2023 tours. And so now, getting back to our interview, now, what did the Olmsted brothers do for this pretty park?
Okay, so in 1902, when it was still a private park, the Olmsted brothers were hired to make a beautiful design for the park, and they always start by making the design, a plan of what is already there. So you have on that plan a blueprint of what the park looked like before it was made into an Olmsted design park. Then they changed it over, so they made then blueprints that show what the park was going to become. And it was implemented fully. There were trees that are still in there. The Olmsted design said what trees to put where, and they're still in place. The Olmsted brothers also said, please put these fields here, this cricket court there. Then they put the sections with the little folks area, the wading pool, the gymnastics area for adults. Inside of the place with a wading pool, they put a section for younger people to do calisthenics, and they also put a section for women to do calisthenics. I don't know if those last 2 were built. That'd be very interesting to find out. I've gone through all the city reports from the years that are relevant, and there's no detail about those 2. But they had those 3 major sections, and that is incredible to have that happen. Now, the Olmsted brothers also said to put certain plants in certain positions, and they made a plant list. They said, plant this plant here and make sure it's this particular species of plant, a bush, a rose bush, a tree. And the trees were fully implemented, and many of the bushes were, I don't know about the smaller plants, but what really happened was unique, and we'll cover that in one of the further questions to this. But they, in some sense, yes, did the plan like delivered, and the Department of Public Works of Holyoke is the one doing it. And this was done in the other 3 Olmsted design plants of Holyoke, including Pulaski Park, Jones Point Park, and Elmwood Park. They almost always came very close to what the Olmsted said they were going to do.
Now, tell us about the roses of the park.
Okay, now the roses of the park, it so happens, excuse me, it so happens that the roses came after. It wasn't part of the design, but there were plenty of flowers put in the design of the park. And what happened is a lot of the women that lived in the Springdale neighborhood loved to have rose plants there. And so it developed that rose bushes started being put very close to what was called the Little Folks area. And by its peak, probably 1940s, the amount of roses there were 800 unique bushes of roses. And you have to remember that roses don't come in one variety, they come in a few hundred varieties. And so you have to wonder how many varieties were there. And this, I believe this started sometime in the late 19 teens, and it continued to about 1952. Rose bushes, unfortunately, don't last forever, and so they died away. And then there was a woman in 1980s and early 1990s. They started to get this going again, and she did. And so a lot of people alive today remember that later section. But again, she must have died or moved away, and it wasn't taken care of, and it died off again. The early rose bushes were given to the city by one of the commissioners in the Parks and Playground Department. His name is George Sinclair. He was a professional florist in Holyoke, and he, for free, gave flowers and bushes to many parks of Holyoke. And he gave the rose bushes to these women that wanted to plant them there. So that's an incredible fact.
Now, so who is John Prue, and why is he important to the park?
All right, John Prue was the person that started the old-time park when it was private. And I mentioned that he didn't want to give this up. And I was going to tell you his story. His story is that he was a contractor that developed the Springdale neighborhood. He put his own house into place at the southern boundary of this neighborhood. He made a beautiful shingle-style Victorian home with a Queen Anne tower to it. It's gorgeous. It's still there. And across the street, he built another building, but he didn't stop there. So he built that in 1886, and from there, it just exploded with houses. And so I think there's about 200 houses in Springdale area. Most of them are on the side streets and in the parallel streets to Main Street. And when he put them in, a lot of them were made with the same design, he used over and over again. But some are made by other contractors and they have a different look. So it's interesting walking the side streets in that area, seeing what was put in where. And he did not have a hand in the tenement houses went up. The 3 big apartment complexes went up across the street from the park, and that raised the population upwards and upwards. So Springdale neighborhood and park have a very elaborate history to it, and hopefully you get to go on one of my tours.
Okay. Now, again, thank you, Robert, for joining us. And again, you can find out more information at his site at holyokecanaltour.org. And hopefully you check out some of our other podcasts and his upcoming schedule for the rest of the summer. Thank you.